Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Everybody good? Can everybody see the screen up here? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Alexxiss Jackson, and I'm a working director of photography. And as you can tell by this picture, I am also a raging lens nerd. This picture was actually taken the night before I went into production for a metal music video. And I was really excited to shoot with these Zeiss uncoated super speeds. I'm gonna talk about those lenses and other lenses in more detail over the course of the next hour. But really what I want you to get from this picture is that I'm really almost obsessively into lenses. In fact, I would say that as a cinematographer, two of the details that I pay the most attention to are lenses and also skin tones. Skin is such an interesting texture, and not in a it puts the lotion on its skin or it gets the hose again, creepy way. But in terms of the way that it absorbs and reflects light, you have so many different shades of skin. You can have somebody with brown skin with red undertones or brown skin with yellow undertones. Some people have more of a pinkish quality to their skin or bluish quality. And all of those different shades of skin kind of interact with light differently and absorb and reflect light differently. So that's a detail that I really like to pay attention to. Not just in terms of, for example, lighting decisions, but also the lenses and filters that I use. So you'll definitely hear me reference that a couple more times today. The aggregate point of the presentation that I'm making today is just encouraging or urging all of you to think about things like that when you're making decisions in terms of what lenses you want to take on a given production. As I was talking about how skin is so different and the mood of your film may be different. There are so many different narrative functions or looks that you can decide that you want to go for that will be better served by different lens or filter combinations. So again, just kind of a detail to keep in mind when you're making those decisions. For example, maybe you're shooting a music video for a female pop star and she wants her skin to be flawless and look really pretty and everything to be very, have a dreamy quality. There are lenses that are gonna do that better than other lenses. Like I said, it's not a one size fits all. Or, another example, maybe you are shooting a comedy and the director wants it to be very bright, not overexposed, but have a brighter quality to it. There are filters that you could use that will help you with that. You're shooting a horror film and you want it to look foggy outside. There are double fog filters that you can use that will make it look like it's foggy outside, even if it's not. These are all things that you can accomplish with different, lens and filter combinations. And in this day and age of we'll fix it in post, which is blasphemy. You should literally never say that. But a lot of times people think, oh, well, we'll kind of create this look in the post-production process or during the color grade. And it's why would you do that when there are so many tools available to you as a cinematographer to create those looks in camera and to craft those looks and also simultaneously kind of craft and hone your own style as a DP. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I hope that by the time you all leave, you'll maybe have one or two more ideas of how to approach cinematography or how to think about it. And yeah, let's get started. So to give you a little bit more background about me and what qualifies me to stand up here, I'm originally from Detroit, born and raised. I went to film school at the University of Michigan, go Blue. I received a dual degree in film and English there, and I also completed the intensive summer film program at the University of Southern California. Since then, my career has largely focused on cinematography, music videos, and editing. It's always kind of good to wear a couple of different hats because it gives you multiple streams of income, and it also will ultimately make you better at whatever it is that is your specialty. So cinematography and camera work is my specialty and also my main source of income. But I do kind of like to think that I have a varied skill set. Let me see, I've won a couple of awards. I've had music videos that I've done be screened at film festivals across the United States, in Canada, Australia, the UK. I have a music video that I did screening in London today, and with the time difference, that should be happening at some point while I'm up here today. That music video should be screening in London, so I'm kind of excited about that. I was the director of photography and editor on a TV show segment for Univision Atlanta, where we interviewed, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the guy who made Hamilton. We interviewed his mom for a Mother's Day special. Like I said, I've done lots of music videos, sci-fi films, dramas. I recently did my first comedy, commercials, promotional videos, lots of different things. So because I don't know like everybody here in terms of what your knowledge or level of experience is, I want to kind of go over a few basics to make sure that everything that I'm talking about is as inclusive as possible for everyone. So a couple of basics about lenses, production value. Using quality glass is always going to instantly up your production value no matter what you're doing. It's not going to turn your DSLR into an Alexa, but you can absolutely tell the difference between cheap lenses and quality lenses. So if you are a cinematographer that's just starting out, or somebody that's interested in cinematography, but you're maybe, like I said, just starting out, or you're working on things that don't have a big budget, that's something that you can do that will instantly make your work look better, and something that is very easily accessible to you. You can rent good lenses even if you can't afford to buy them. So that's something that I definitely kind of recommend keeping in mind if you're starting out as a DP, and all throughout your career, is thinking about the production value that lenses are going to add. Lens mounts. So most professional cameras, and pretty much all of the prosumer cameras, like the Canon DSLRs, those kind of things, are all designed to have interchangeable lenses. So what that means, of course, is that you don't have a lens that is permanently affixed to the camera body. You switch them in and out. And these different cameras have different lens mounts. So for example, you have kind of the industry standard is the Arri PL mount, which most of the things that you see in theaters, like if you go watch, Blade Runner or a Marvel film, most of those were generally shot on a camera that's utilizing an Arri PL mount or a PV mount, which is Panavision. You also have EF mounts, which are Canon mounts. That's another very popular mount. So your Canon DSLRs, your C100s, your C200s are all going to come equipped with that Canon mount. And a lot of cameras these days, in fact, like the Red Monstro, most Red cameras, in fact, like Blackmagic cameras, come with fairly easily changeable lens mounts. So with just a couple minutes and a couple of tools, you can switch from, say, a PL mount to an EF mount, which will also kind of widen your options in terms of what lenses you can take on a given shoot. But of course, that is going to impact what lenses you can rent, what kind of lens mount is going to be on the individual camera that you're shooting with. Focal length, okay. Focal length is going to impact so many different aspects of your image, from your depth of field, which is basically the amount of your image that can be in focus at a given time, background separation. I remember I was reading an article about this film where they wanted to make it look like an airplane was about to run some people over on the runway. And what they did is that they pulled the camera way back and put a long telephoto lens on there because it made the objects seem much closer to each other, even though in actual life, they were very far away from each other. So your image is definitely going to be influenced by the focal length of the lens that you decide to use. So that is definitely something that you should keep in mind as you're making decisions about what lenses you want to use. In fact, one time I was working with this director, and he's like, oh, this is a close-up, so that means you want to use your telephoto lens, right? And I said, well, no, that's not how we make lens decisions. Like I said, there are a lot of things that are going to determine what is the best focal length for you to use for a given shot, or, like I said, a given project. And along that same vein, primes versus zooms. So a prime lens is a lens that has a fixed focal length. So you could have like an 85mm prime or something like that, and that's the only focal length that you can, achieve on that lens. And then zooms, I think everybody's kind of familiar with the idea of zooming in and out, even if you don't know the mechanics of it. What it technically means is that on a lens, you can kind of increase and decrease the focal length, and that's going to adjust your image. So those are all things to kind of keep in mind when you're making decisions. Like the very kind of basic things about what lenses you want to use is the mount that's on your camera, what focal length you need for what you're trying to do, whether or not you want to take out a prime or a zoom, etc. And one more thing that I do want to say, there's a really big difference between photography zooms and cinema zooms. Cinema zooms are designed to be parfocal, which means that they maintain the same focus point throughout that focal length range. So that's also something to keep in mind if you don't have the money to rent, like an Angenieux Optimo 15-40, which costs like $40,000 to buy. You want to keep that in mind in terms of what you're doing, because shooting with photography zooms is just, there's some things that kind of go wrong with that sometimes. Okay, filters, which is the other thing that I said that I was going to talk about today. So different filters have different functions, right? So you have more so your technical filters that are achieving something in particular, like ND filters, which are designed to lessen the amount of light that's coming in through your lens. So maybe you're outside and it's really bright outside, and in order to just get proper exposure, you need to lessen the amount of light that's coming in. Or, those things are mutually exclusive. You can use an ND filter if, let's say, you want to decrease the amount of light that's coming in because you want to shoot with your aperture wide open to get that really shallow depth of field. Those are all things to kind of keep in mind when you're deciding what filters you want to use. They have filters that give you anamorphic lens flares, or, like as I mentioned earlier, like double fog filters that make it look like it's foggy outside even when it isn't. I gave an example here of like the Hollywood star filter that gives you these kind of star patterns where you have points of light in the image. There are literally like so many different things that you can accomplish and so many like creative things that you can do with different filters that are on the market that can, like I said, give you that specific look and kind of help you hone your style as a DP. Filters come in different shapes and sizes. So for example, you can have circular filters, which you screw directly on and off the lens. Of course, if you're using a circular filter, you have to have one that is the same diameter as like the front part of your lens, right? We also have square filters, which come in, 4x4, 4x5, 6x6, depending on what kind of matte box you're using. And those are designed to go, like I said, use an ND filter and double fog filter at the same time. And so you have, 2 or 3 stages in your matte box, so you can use those multiple filters. And also, if you're using different lenses with different front diameters, then you don't have to worry about getting filters that are going to fit every single lens you're using. There are definitely way more options, as far as I'm concerned, that companies make in like the square filter sizes. You have like these graduated filters that do different color things. Like I said, lots of different options. So again, the entire point of today is just urging you all to think about all of these things when you're crafting a look or deciding what you're gonna do with a project that you have coming up. Like, how can I make this look different? Like, how can I give it more of a specific look? I feel like this is going a little bit faster than I expected to. Everybody good? Am I going too fast? Okay. All right, so here are some examples of work that I've done. This is actually the music video that is screening in London, maybe as we speak, who knows? So for this, it takes place in 3 different historical time periods, and so I really wanted each time period to have a different look, but I didn't want to do something as basic as, putting it in sepia tones or black and white. So I got this Tiffin Antique Suede 2 filter, which you can see really kind of enriches the greens and browns. You get these kind of golden hues in different places in the sky. And I was really happy with this. It's one of my favorite like in-camera looks that I've created because I felt like it gave it that like old-fashioned vintage look of it being a different time period, even though it's still in full color and isn't something that really pops out at you. I just still feel like this looks like it was a long time ago. So I was very happy with it. Ooh, okay. This is actually from my most recent shoot, which was Monday and Tuesday of this week. So I was the director of photography on this series of promotional videos for these products that are designed for women that are breast cancer survivors. And so like all of the women in these upcoming stills have had mastectomies, like some have had chemo, and a lot of them talked about this idea of wanting to feel feminine again, or like not feeling as pretty. Like that was something that came up a lot. And so I really wanted the cinematography to reflect that, to give it this really kind of soft, feminine look. You have this focus fall off and all of that. And so I used these Cooke Speed Panchros, which are Cooke lenses that were originally invented in 1921 and were popularized in the 1920s and 30s. And they're really good for smoothing out imperfections and blemishes. And then to kind of take that to another level, I also threw a Tiffin Satin 2 filter on here, which is also good for smoothing out skin tones and giving this really soft look. So the director was really happy with it. I think they look beautiful. There's a couple more you can look at here that all have this very soft, feminine look to kind of go along with what these products are supposed to actually provide for these women. I believe that this one I did on a 75mm Cook Speed Panchro, which that's kind of my favorite focal length to live around, is 75 or 85mm. I feel like it's really flattering to the human face. You again get this kind of creamy background where it's not in focus, so it really makes your subject pop. And like I said, I feel like it's really flattering to the human face. When you have like wide angle lenses up close to people's faces, sometimes it makes it look a little bit flatter. These are all from the same shoot. Okay, so with this one, this is one that I wanted to point out. So in addition to the Cook Speed Panchros and the Tiffin Satin 2, I also used a polarizer on this shot, which polarizers are useful for minimizing reflections on different surfaces. So you see how you can see right through the water? That's what polarizers are good for seeing through surfaces. And also they'll make blues a little bit richer. A trick that I like to do with polarizers, if I'm shooting anything outside, it'll make the sky bluer. It'll really make the blue in the sky pop. Okay, so this is a comedy film that I shot recently, and the directors really wanted to have it look very bright, and they sent me some reference photos, and I brought out a Schneider Optics White Frost 1/8 filter, which is a really subtle look, but it just kind of makes the highlights bloom a little bit. It lowers the contrast, like lifts up the blacks a little bit. So that's kind of an example that I was giving earlier, right? Like how you can take a filter and make it have like a little bit more of a certain look in a way that's very subtle, because I don't think it's very noticeable, but everything just had like a little bit of a brighter, like happier quality to it. This was also done on a Zeiss 85mm lens, which is pretty much one of my favorite lenses. And again, kind of how I was saying a second ago, you see how it really kind of shapes the human face. It blurs out the background behind them. It makes it very smooth and creamy. So for pretty much anything where I'm going for a bit of a beauty look, that's really kind of my go-to, is around like 75 or 85mm. That's another shot from that same film. Okay, so this one is from a sci-fi film that I was the DP on, and this hasn't been color graded, and I'm not using any filters on this, but this again was shot with that 85mm lens I was just talking about, and I feel like this is a really good image to show you what that lens does. You know, again, like I said, very creamy background, like they're basically in a forest, and all you see are these kind of greens and like white pinpoints of light, like really pretty bokeh. And you see how it kind of shapes her face and makes her pop from the background. So it's really good for separating your subject from the background and making them stand out, and also making them look really nice while you're doing it. This is also from that sci-fi film. Again, I use that 85mm, but here it serves more of a narrative function. These two characters are reconnecting after a really long time, and so they kind of feel like they're the only people in the world right now. And so I wanted to kind of narratively show that by using that lens that makes them separate from the background and makes the background really out of focus, because the idea here is that they're only focused on each other, right? So, like I said, just all different things that you can kind of think about when you're making those lens decisions, from a narrative function or just a look that you're going for. So this is a music video that I DP'd recently, and I shot most of this on a 28mm Zeiss actually, specifically because we were going for this film noir theme, and the 28mm lens was really popular in early cinema because it's slightly wider than the human field of view. Human field of view is considered to be pretty congruent with like a 35mm lens. And so they would use this lens, like this conventional lot in early cinema, to make people feel like they were a part of the action, but still seeing slightly more than they would normally be able to if they were looking at it in real life. So again, like I said, we were going for this film noir theme, so I wanted to kind of make it look like those old school film noir movies. The shot where she's at the door is actually on a 55mm, but I just really like the way it looks, so I still included it. It's like literally one of my favorite shots ever. Okay. Is this freezing? Is it not playing? All right. Sorry everybody, we've been having a few issues with this computer today. Okay, this video to play. Oh no. Well, let me kind of escape out of it like a second ago, but now apparently I'm not doing that anymore. On the last couple of slides. Oh, it's fine. All right, so while we're getting these technical difficulties worked out, how's everybody doing? Everybody good? Okay. Like, was I going too fast? Sometimes, because I'm really into stuff like this, sometimes I get like really excitable and I'm like, and this, and this, and that. And so I don't know if it makes it harder for people to like follow what I'm talking about. Yes?
Can I ask a question? The video you shot, the historic music video you shot, what filter did you use?
I use an antique suede 2 filter, which is made by Tiffin. The two like biggest, I would say, manufacturers of filters like that are Tiffin and Schneider Optics, and they have a lot of filters that kind of do the same thing, and they all have very subtle differences. With that music video and that scene, I was kind of deciding during pre-production whether or not I wanted to use an antique suede filter or a chocolate filter, which does kind of the same thing in terms of like making those browns deeper, but I thought that it did a little bit too much and kind of started to stray into looking a little sepia. And like I said, I didn't want to do that. So again, it's one of those things where if you're, say, interested in a specific look, right? There are so many different resources available to you online from Tiffin and Schneider Optics, where they do tests with their different filters, with different lenses, and they'll move lights around in the image so that you can kind of see the different properties of what that filter is specifically going to do to your image. So it's a great thing to do during pre-production to kind of look at all the options that they have available. The Satin 2 filter that I mentioned earlier that I use a lot is a kind of diffusion filter. And they also have filters like, Pro Mist, which is kind of an industry standard, Black Pro Mist, Black Satin, Glimmer Glass. And these all kind of do the same thing, but in very slightly different ways. And some are more overt than others. So like I said, if there's kind of a look that you're thinking about or an idea that you have, it's really easy to like kind of look up these companies and look at their Vimeos or their YouTubes and see examples where they'll go out and shoot different people or different environments so you can see what it's going to do to your image. Yes?
Can I also to ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, in your sci-fi movie that you shot, the first image that you showed was just the woman standing in the forest, and she had a catchlight in her eyes. Mm-hmm. I was just curious what's your method for doing a catchlight outside? Yeah. So I love using my 48-inch disc reflector for stuff like that. And I wrote a blog post once where I was talking about skin tones, and I specifically referenced that. I use the golden side of a reflector disc, which is also really good for people with brown skin like that, kind of making their skin glow. And then also, we're just on the slide right before this one. And then, it gives you that kind of round catch light in people's eyes. So because that's round, I'll go through these last couple of slides. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so these are the Zeiss uncoated super speeds that I showed you all the picture earlier of me acting like I was gonna eat them or something. So with Zeiss uncoated super speeds, pretty much all lenses are designed with this coating to minimize lens flares and ghosting, because lens flares are cool for a metal video, but you don't want them in the middle of an episode of Jeopardy or a presidential debate or something like that. So you want to be able to utilize your lenses without them, kind of doing that when light hits the sensor, right? But they have lenses where you specifically remove that coating, and then you get stuff like this, these really intense flares that are kind of stretching across the screen. I had a total light swinging, and the lead singer is singing into a total light, which is a really old school tungsten light that a lot of people don't really use anymore. But that's how you get those really orange flares that are kind of stretching across. You also, in these shots where we have the quasar swinging, you can also see a little bit kind of a more subtle flare that's hitting the front of the screen. But you can also see in the shots of the snake or the shots of the band where there isn't a light source in the frame, it kind of just looks like any other lens. So that's when you're using uncoated lenses, like that's what you're gonna get. Like if you have lights in the frame, then it's going to give you these really beautiful flares and kind of give you a dreamy quality, but it's also entirely possible to use them on other things and have them look relatively normal. Next slide, please. Okay, so I didn't do this. I'm not responsible for this. I did not create this image, but I wanted to incorporate it because it's an example of using filters in a way that's really, really pronounced. So this is from Blade Runner 2049, for which Roger Deakins finally won a Best Cinematography Oscar after being nominated 14 times, exactly. So with this, it was all shot with like airy master primes, and for this Las Vegas scene, which I feel like is one of the most iconic looks in the film, to get this like kind of irradiated like orange look, Tiffin actually specifically made some filters for this based off of lead gels. So like the gels that you can put in front of lights on set. Lead gels like Moroccan pink, like golden amber, light amber. They picked some different filters that they wanted to use for this color palette, and then Tiffin made these filters. Can we go to the next slide, please? Tiffin made these filters to give this really pronounced orange look. And so I wanted to show this to you all because most of the ones that I've shown you that I've done are things where it was a little bit more subtle, or we didn't want it to be like really over the top. But I wanted you to see how you can use filters to get like a really pronounced look if you're going for something that really, really stands out. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in all of these, like they use like different combinations of these Tiffin filters to kind of give everything this orange wash. And like we said, it's one of the most iconic looks in the film, and it constantly reminds you that you're in this space that isn't, normal, that you have like radiation everywhere, and it's something that you can't forget because you just see it everywhere, like all over the place. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much it. I have some resources up here that are useful if you want to like learn more or read more about this. And really, no matter where you are in your career as a DP, like it's useful to kind of keep your pulse on new technology and new lenses that are coming out, because it's always changing. Like we're in such a technological field that, the stuff that was new and exciting 2 years ago isn't really new and exciting anymore. So absolutely, I recommend to anybody, whether you're just starting out or no matter where you are, to kind of keep learning and keep seeking out this information. So American Cinematographer is the monthly publication by the ASC, or American Society of Cinematographers. They have a magazine, like a monthly publication, and then also a website. They'll very often interview DPs that were on, film and talk to them about how they lit it or what lenses they use. So you can go watch, A Quiet Place and then read about like how she filmed that and how she lit that. And so that's a really cool resource to have. They also do like lens reviews and talk about like new cameras and new lenses that are coming out. I recently read an article in American Cinematographer that was talking about anamorphics and the companies that are kind of newer and putting out anamorphics these days and comparing them. So again, like really interesting stuff in pretty much every every issue of American Cinematographer that I've ever read. So I think that anybody even remotely interested in being a DP or interested in cinematography should get a subscription to American Cinematographer. AbleCine's website, ablecine.com, they have a blog where they do different like lens reviews and like kind of let you know what new lenses or like camera equipment is coming out. Aperture Rent is a local rental house that's about, I want to say, 20 minutes away from here. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of production value, right? If you're like kind of just starting out as a DP or you're interested in cinematography, renting lenses that you can't afford to buy will instantly take up your production value. And Aperture Rent is a place where you can rent lenses like really affordably. So that is absolutely like something that is accessible to you. They have, some Zeiss Cine lenses and like Zeiss, photography lenses and like all kinds of different things. And like I said, very reasonably priced. PC&E is another rental house. They're going to be a little bit more expensive and like higher end than Aperture Rent. They have a really amazing selection of filters. That's where I rent most of my filters from. And they have kind of a spreadsheet on their website so you can look at all the different filters they have and in what sizes, etc. And you're also going to be able to get, like I said, those higher end lenses, like those, airy anamorphic primes and stuff like that. Full frame digital, same thing. That's where you're going to get those higher lenses, those anamorphics, and that's where I got those Cook Speed Pancros from. It's owned by Tom Jordan, who is super knowledgeable about lenses, and he's a really cool guy, so I definitely recommend patronizing them when you have the budget to afford those lenses. And then Commander, same thing. That's where you're gonna get those like higher end, more expensive lenses, like the Angino Optimo that I mentioned to you all earlier that costs $40,000 to buy. You know, you can get that lens there, etc. So yeah, that's all, folks. I guess this, you know, if anybody else has any questions, this is a good time for that. Yeah?
Are you a part of the Cinematographers Union?
I'm not. That's something that I've kind of been going back and forth in my head about a lot, about whether or not I'm gonna join the union at some point. There are definitely, absolutely, like benefits to doing it. If I wanted to join as a DP, that would cost me like $9,000, and I don't know that I want to do that right now. So I absolutely recommend it to anyone, especially if you're like kind of starting out as a second AC or a first AC. Definitely benefits to it. I personally have not done it yet, but it is something that I'm still kind of thinking about. Anyone else? Yes?
Who are some cinematographers that you look to inspiration?
Oh, Rachel Morrison, who I don't know if everybody in here is familiar with her. She just became the first woman to ever be nominated for Best Cinematography in the history of the Oscars, like this year, like the 90th one. Yeah, indeed. She's awesome, and she's also really good at what she does. She was nominated for her work on Mudbound, but she also was the DP on Black Panther. She's like really doing her thing right now. Roger Deakins, of course, who is a master cinematographer, and I feel like I mean, what more can you even say? Like 14 Oscar nominations before you even win like your first one. Kira Kelly, I look to her for inspiration just because, you know, as we were talking about there being not as many like female cinematographers, like especially women of color, you don't see as many of them. And she's one of the only like women of color that I know that is filming, you know, like Hollywood stuff. She was the DP on 13th, the documentary by Ava DuVernay. Lubetzky, of course, like I think that Birdman is probably like my favorite thing that I've ever seen as it relates to cinematography. It's just like incredible. I haven't seen it in a while. I think I'm gonna watch it again like in the next couple of days. All right, anybody else? Yes?
When it comes to film fairs, what would you recommend to sort of take greens that you would consider like cheesy and modern cinema and make it more like, palatable to a modern audience?
You said greens? That's interesting. There are a lot of filters that do things specifically in terms of color, and off the top of my head, I can't think of one that is going to specifically like alter those greens. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about kind of checking out their YouTube and their Vimeo and getting the opportunity to really see examples of what filters are going to do to different parts of your image. Another thing about that, like depending on what you're doing, this wasn't what we were actually talking about today, because there's so much in terms of cinematography to talk about, like you can't just do it all in 1 hour. But in terms of like gels, you know, I was talking about the Lee gels that they used on Blade Runner. They have like so many different gel options that you can use, and on Lee's website, for example, you can go through all of them and they'll tell you this is good for skin, or this is good for making fluorescent lights, or like street lights look like this other kind of light. You know what I mean? Like they have so many different things that will potentially accomplish what you want to accomplish. So I would say that in addition to looking at like Tiffin or Snyder Optics filters, like on camera filters, also think about like the gels that you can use on your lighting sources that are also going to impact those aspects of your image. Yes?
What do you think about the trend that we have going in the past 25 years or so, where all of our color grading ends up being really, really prominently blue and orange? And how do you think we start to move on from that?
Oh God, it's really funny. I just I didn't write a blog post about it, but one of the colorists that I work with a lot, like we were talking about that. You know, it's like the summer blockbuster look and the whole idea behind it. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with that convention, but you see this color grading convention where because skin is orange and like explosions are orange, you want to have everything else be kind of teal or blue because it makes skin pop and it makes explosions pop, right? So it makes sense in theory because those two things are on opposite ends of the color wheel, which is why you do that. But it does get kind of boring, or it becomes like trite because you just see it all the time. I don't know if that's going away. I don't know if that's going away anytime soon. Unless like some of you all who are also interested in color grading, you know, go into color grading and refuse to do it. Maybe we can just like start a revolution and end that completely. But other than that, you know, like I said, I understand the purpose of it, but it's one of those things where you see it so much, it just kind of becomes like, can we do something different, please? Yes?
I don't know if you've seen Hereditary or yet. No.
Oh, the scary one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, so
do that.
well, just like that one was kind of the example, but other horror films that have come out in the last decade, we're getting technologies that can bring the light down significantly, and that we can play around in the shadows and start to see things that we didn't before. What are like I don't know if you've had experience playing with like such low light like that, but what are like some of the trappings that you want to look out for when you bring the light down that much, when you're dealing with losing a lot of the detail you're going to get from like your classic 3-point lighting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this day and age, when you have, like the Sony A7S and like those cameras that are really kind of designed to shoot in low light, there are so many more options that are available to you, and it makes it more doable. You know, if you're shooting on like an A7S and you're using a really fast lens where you can like open up the aperture a lot, like you can shoot in instances where your human eye wouldn't really be able to see stuff, and you can see it, like on camera. So it's just one of those things. I would say that the trappings that you have to look out for are like grain and noise in your shadows. Like I said, the A7S is one of those cameras that I don't really use, but if I wanted to do something in low light like that, I would probably go with that over anything else. And that's really good for no matter what ISO you're at, not giving you a whole bunch of grain and noise in your shadows, which is going to be one of the biggest concerns. The other thing, of course, is that when something is really shadowed or not lit well, like if you think about it, if you open your eyes in the middle of the night, you may be able to see like the colors in your image and making sure that it's not, it's just super flat and like one-dimensional. Yes?
Hi, do you have any standard lenses like focal lengths, apertures, or gels or filters that you think are a must-have for upcoming like filmmakers?
Yeah, for sure. Again, as I was saying earlier about kind of renting lenses that you can't afford to buy, I think that that's always a good way to go. And like lenses that are really good to rent, that are affordable and really good. Like I said earlier, the Zeiss 85mm is one of my favorite lenses. I love what it does to the human face and how it makes, like I said, your subject pop from the background. You always want to have like a 35mm or a 50mm depending on what camera you're on. As I was mentioning before, like 35mm is kind of considered to be like the human field of view, like around like 35 to 50. And so if you want to have just something that's going to make somebody feel like they're there without feeling like the camera is intrusive or like it's obvious to them that they're looking at an image, that's a good focal length to go with for that. Like I said, ND filters are kind of a standard that everybody is familiar with, and a lot of cameras are coming with built-in ND filters now, like the Ursa Mini Pro, for example. I think the Red Monstro VistaVision that just came out also has built-in NDs. But yeah, like with ND filters, like that's something that you kind of always want to have on hand if you want to shoot wide open and get that really beautiful like shallow depth of field, but you're somewhere where you can't control your light, like maybe you're using natural light and of course you can't tell the sun to turn down a little bit. Like having ND filters always on hand and at their different strengths will give you the ability to impact the amount of light that you're getting for a given image. So yeah, just off the top of my head, without listing, like every single thing that might take me a while, my favorite kind of focal length to go with, especially for like human faces, are like 85mm, 75mm, and then I would definitely recommend having like NDs on hand. And the Tiffin Satin 2 or like Satin 1 are like, I also really like those filters for how they smooth out people's skin tones. So if you're dealing with somebody who is maybe subconscious about the size of their pores or their acne, it's a good way to kind of make that look better in this day and age of like 8K and all of these really high resolutions where you can see everything that's happening in somebody's face.
Thank you so much.
Yes?
So going back to the trends in cinematography, I've noticed a lot, and like I don't know if this is an actual trend, but I've noticed a lot more slow motion. And so that, and also the shallow depth of field, do you think we could be using slow motion as a crutch because we feel like if you just do something in slow motion, it automatically looks good? And
yeah.
also the shallow depth of field is kind of like an easy way to separate the subject from the background. So do you think we could be using those as crutches?
I think that everything can be used for a crutch if you're not making it for a good, if you're not making that decision for a good reason, right? Kind of, a stick can be used, even though a stick is normally a stick, like it can be used as a crutch if that's what you're doing with it, like if you're putting all your weight on it. So saying all of that to say that I think that shallow depth of field is one of those things, especially when you have like some more like kind of amateur like DSLR shooters that just got their first camera. They're like, oh, this looks cinematic, so I'm gonna have everything, I'm gonna shoot it this way because it looks more cinematic. Well, I mean, actually there are a lot of films and a lot of stuff that happens in cinema that does not do that. So cinematic is not just relegated to this this depth of field. So I think a lot of people do use that as a crutch to kind of make something look cinematic, but at the same time, there are absolutely times when it's useful to use a shallow depth of field, and there are times when it's useful to use slow motion, even though sometimes people just do it because they think it looks cool or it's going to make something look more professional. And a lot of times that doesn't really work. Something looks professional or it doesn't, regardless of that. So I say all of that to say that anything can be used as a crutch if you're not doing it for the right reasons. Like if your narrative isn't informing it, or it's not accomplishing something else, it can become a crutch. Yes? I'm sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
In terms of lighting, whenever you're starting to work with DPing and everything, how would you feel, what are some things to avoid and what are some basics to know for different skin tones? Because I feel like in a lot of lighting classes, they don't have a variety as much.
Right.
Which is not a problem, but it is kind of whenever your audience and your cast is that skin tone that you're going for.
Yeah.
So what are some good things to look? What are some good things to focus on when you're trying to light for different shades of like in Insecure, how they play with colorful lighting instead? I kind of like that.
I'm actually really happy that you asked me that, because I literally wrote a blog post like a couple months ago about tips and tricks for lighting for different skin tones, and I referenced the DP on Insecure, like Ava Berkowski. Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned in there is kind of tailoring your lighting decisions based on who's going to be in front of your camera, right? So for example, diffusion materials, there are, there's a litany of different diffusion materials out there, from, full grid, light grid, what have you, but there are some that work really well with brown skin tones, like unbleached muslin. I swear by unbleached muslin. In the stills that I showed you of the women who had breast cancer, I use unbleached muslin on pretty much all of them just because it warmed up everybody's skin tone. If you're dealing with somebody whose skin is like really pale, it might be a little bit too much and it won't look real. But for anyone with, I would say, tan to dark skin, unbleached muslin just kind of makes people's skin glow and it looks really good. Another thing, gold reflectors, like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about catch lights, can also kind of give a really nice glow to like brown skin or dark skin. And I would say really like knowing is half the battle. Like if it's something that you're paying attention to, you're gonna start to notice that, there are different things that work well, like maybe kind of turning your color, like if you're on an LED or you're on a sky panel or something where you can alter your color temperature, maybe going a little bit more towards tungsten to warm up people's skin tones. I think the most important thing really is, now that you know this is something that I'm thinking about and something that I want to focus on, like now like the sky is the limit for just when you're on set looking and saying, okay, when I do this, it accomplishes this, or this looks better with this person's skin tone, and just not lighting everybody the same way, which is what a lot of people do. Yes?
If you have two people in the shot with two wildly different skin tones, like how do you go about lighting them?
Well, yeah, you just want to light them separately and then kind of flag the light off on each person so that it's not spilling over onto the other. So you might have, like one lighting setup, like if you're doing something that's fairly soft and like diffuse on one person, and then just flagging it off so it's not hitting the other person, and just like specifically lighting them separately. Yes? Based on what it is we're doing. So, making sure that I have the room to do that the way that I want to do it, and not kind of be relegated to, what we can afford, which, of course, there's always going to be budget restrictions, but that's a really important thing, so that you're not, planning on getting techno cranes and, stuff like that when you can't actually afford them, when you can only afford, like a Steadicam or a tripod or something, Steadicams are expensive, actually, so that wasn't a good example. But yeah, I would say that those are some of the things that you want to start off with, is kind of getting a full idea of what their vision is, and like as a DP, like the more and more you work, you'll start to know how to achieve that, or getting enough of an idea of it that you can do some research if it's not something that you've done before. So just getting the most information that you can specifically about the look and kind of starting there, and then also what budget is available to you to create that look. Yes?
How closely do you work with the makeup on your shoots? Just because some of the photography I've done is like glamour photography, so that kind of becomes the focus of the image, the kind of art on the face, as it were. So, do you what kind of stream of conversation does that go, like from them to you, or from you to them, talking about like how you're gonna tweak the color balance and everything like that, making sure that the face looks as you want it to?
I don't really, honestly. Like I don't really deal with the makeup department a whole lot, because usually, kind of going back to what I was saying a second ago about your responsibility as a DP to be kind of to visually accomplish what the director wants to do. Like usually I kind of let the director tell, makeup what he or she is trying to accomplish. And yeah, I don't really deal with makeup at all. But I mean, that's also, has to do with the given project, like how big or small the crew is. If you're on a smaller crew, it might be a situation where you're dealing with that. Sometimes I direct and DP things, especially music videos, and in an instance like that, I'm gonna be, dealing with a makeup artist. But when I'm just a DP on a fairly large shoot, I don't talk to them at all. I feel like I've been neglecting this side of the room because I'm kind of facing this way. So yes.
How do you get across to the director the kind of ideas that you're getting with cinematography if they don't really understand what lenses or?
That is a really good question.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so when you're talking to a director and they don't really understand lenses and cinematography, how do you kind of get on the same page about what they want and what you need to do? You're gonna run into directors from all different walks of this conversation. You're gonna run into the directors that maybe used to DP or have a fair amount of knowledge about cinematography, and they might be a little bit more specific in terms of, we wanna do this and we wanna use this lens, and we wanna have this light coming from here, and we're gonna use sky panels, and we're gonna use a snoot. Sometimes you're gonna run into people like that, and then other times you're gonna run into directors that just will tell you, I want it to have high contrast. Go do that, basically. So it's one of those things that's gonna kind of depend on each individual interaction. And again, your job as a DP is to help them fill in those gaps when they don't know exactly what they want or know exactly how to achieve it. A lot of times they at least can tell you, okay, I want it to, again, visual references, I want it to look like A Quiet Place, or I don't know why I keep bringing up A Quiet Place. I just saw it recently, probably. But yeah, or a TV show that they saw, or even a picture. That's a really good way to communicate with a director that doesn't have that technical knowledge, is to ask them to send you images, stills or video clips that have the look that they're going for, and then you can just kind of figure out where to go from there in terms of how to achieve that. Yes?
So if you're told as a DP to shoot flat, your image flat, do some of these filters still work? Like the token satin, but they still work on a shooting flat?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still baked into the image, so it'll be augmented by a color grade or something like that. But it absolutely makes a difference. And in this day and age, if you know that your footage is going to be color graded, you're generally going to shoot flat. But for example, with the satin filter, that's something that smooths out skin tones a little bit. So that's going to be important, or that's going to translate even if you're not getting, all of your color information right away. There are probably some filters or some lighting setups that you might feel aren't going to make as big of a difference if you're shooting flat. But again, when it gets to the colorist, they're not just kind of starting from scratch and coloring stuff in. They're pulling colors out that are already into the image, or pulling that information out that's already in the image, and so it still definitely translates. Yes?
Where can we find a blog?
That's funny. Okay, so I'm going to be kind of implementing my own blog on my website very soon. I haven't actually done it yet, but I've written blogs and articles for other entities So I mean, if you do a search for like my name, which is Alexxiss Jackson, you can find like a lot of, you know, like things that I've written, or like I said, I'm a huge lens nerd, so I write a lot of stuff about like lens reviews when I try a lens for the first time and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't have my own official blog yet, and I kind of wish that I did right for this exact moment. I'm gonna jump in my time machine and go back and make my blog so that I can have a better answer for your question. But yeah, if you search me online, I also have like, you know, Instagram and, you know, and Twitter and stuff like that, and I post a lot of blogs that I write for other entities. Like I kind of centralize them on my Twitter page.
Cool, thank you.
Anybody else? Yes?
What's your Instagram and Twitter handle so we can find you?
It's S is in significant, F is in filibuster, poetic. So SF Poetic is like my Instagram, my Twitter, my Vimeo, my YouTube. I don't really update YouTube all that often, but yeah, pretty much any handle that, or any place you would be looking for me, you can find me at SF Poetic. That's also my website, is sfpoetic.tv. So I'm also findable there. Anybody else? Yes?
What situation would you shoot lower than 24 frames? Let's say like 11 frames.
I've never actually done that. It would probably be in a situation where you ultimately are planning on doing something in like fast motion, because that's kind of what happens, right? Like if you're over cranking, which means say you're shooting in, you know, 100 frames per second or 80 frames per second, that means when you play it back at 24, you're getting like really slow motion, and vice versa. If you shoot at something less than 24, you know, you're getting something that's going much faster. So I've never done that, but you know, I'm sure that there's some application that one could use, you know, especially if you're doing something that's like a little bit more artistic and you want it to be moving really fast. I would probably just still shoot it in 24 and like speed it up in post, which I know I said earlier, don't ever say you'll fix it in post. But I would probably do that to be safe. But that's an interesting question, because I've never actually done that. So yeah, but I can tell you that that's what it will do. You know, I can tell you that shooting something in 11 frames per second or something like that, when you play it back at 24 or what have you, is gonna make it go really fast. Yes?
How important, or like, is shutter angle like even important? Like,
Yeah, so you mean like, for example, like 180 degree and stuff like that? That's pretty much the standard. What it actually does, if I put it into terms, for example, like if you're shooting on a DSLR and if you're shooting on kind of like one of those cameras that doesn't just ask you about shutter angle, it asks you about shutter speed, right? What that ultimately is still, you know, like how fast your shutter is going compared to what frame rate you're actually shooting at. So when you're shooting at one that's higher than, you know, 180, then you're going to get like less motion blur. Things are going to be like really crisp, but also kind of look a little bit jittery for that reason, because it's not that standard. And then, you know, like vice versa, you'll get like more blur, or things will be like less clear if you're shooting at basically, you know, like a shutter speed that's lower than that 180 degree amount. Which, for those of you that don't know, if you are shooting on a camera that doesn't give you that option of like shutter angle versus shutter speed, 180 degrees is essentially double that, right? So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, if your shutter angle is 180 degrees, that means that your like shutter speed is 48. Everybody understand that? Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Is that it? Yes?
I don't know how to word this. What's one thing you like to see when working with the director? Or maybe the opposite spectrum. What's a pet peeve of yours that maybe a director or directors you worked with in the past have done that you're like, okay, can you stop doing that? Or
Ooh. Okay, I'm gonna try to answer this without incriminating anyone. I would say, as I've said a lot of times today, that as a DP, your job is to kind of help the director visualize, like, you know, kind of visually achieve what they're going for. But at the same time, it can be really frustrating when your director does not trust you to do that. When you run into an instance where you're saying, okay, well, you know, we're gonna do this way, and doing this another way is not gonna work, and they don't believe you, even though you're the one with the wider field of knowledge about that specific topic. So a lot of times that's not coming from a bad place. but it can be really frustrating. So I would say that that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves. Or I always say that an ounce of pre-production is worth a pound of like troubleshooting shit on set. So like directors who don't understand that and like don't give you what you need to plan ahead or participate in that planning ahead so that you're not trying to figure out everything when you have a finite amount of time to do it. I would say that those are probably my biggest pet peeves.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes?
How involved do you like to be in shot listing as a director?
I definitely, it kind of depends on the director. I've run into situations where I'm shooting something and the director kind of already knows, what kind of shot list they want to have, like what they want to shoot in a wide or what they want to shoot in a close-up, or if they want camera movement here. I've also run into people that have just kind of let me go through the script and do that myself. I prefer to do it myself. Like, I feel like that's part of the artistry of being a director of photography. But, I also understand that some people want to have their hands on things more than others, and that's just kind of a part of the job description, Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you everybody so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of Terminus.
Yes. Create your first animation.
They have their
Yeah, so you might want to think about, there's something like a camera, but it's still, you're not going to
Hey, Green, put a video on.
I like this.
Sure.